Hi everyone, it's Craig. It's a pleasure to be your host today for this web conference, North American MenEngage Network Community of Practice. And you can learn more about NAMEN by visiting our website at namen.menengage.org. Please bear with me as I change the slide deck and we get our session going. So hang on a moment here while I make a few adjustments. All right. So this is the fourth in our series focusing on the Me Too movement and engaging men and boys productively in response to that. We're here to share our stories and to learn together. In the past 3 sessions, we've introduced ourselves and we have presented some theory about practice and goals overall in engaging men and boys for positive, healthy masculinities and promoting an opposition and end to personal violence. We've also talked about specific practices, and now we're really focusing on today on kind of where that lands for you all personally in your work. And we hope to derive today's discussion by your needs and stories. Overall, the MenEngage Alliance is an international network, 42 countries, country networks, and we have a lot of activity going on around the world. We've had the pleasure to have the Swedish group join us in the first few sessions. They aren't able to join us today, I don't believe. But there's some contributions. I hear that their conversation groups for men in response to Me Too has now been translated to English, and they're just formatting it now and will become available. And we'll let you all know through email when that becomes available. There is an online site, which I'll post in a little bit, that will tell you the latest as well. So that's a great resource through their experience in Sweden, which has been very strong, specifically in response to Me Too. So we've got 8 folks online so far today. 17 are registered, so maybe a couple more might join us before we're done. Please do introduce yourself in chat. I know some of you are already doing that, and that's terrific. Thank you. Raise your hand to speak. We are recording the session today, so bear that in mind. We'll post the results on the website. So overall ground rules I'll go over. And you've seen these before if you've joined us. There are a couple of new names, at least one new name on the list. But mute your line as a rule. And if your video starts getting choppy or your audio gets choppy, which is very possible, turn your video off, because that will reduce your bandwidth and ought to make the audio better. Say your name when you speak the first time. That way we get to learn your voice. Practice stepping up and stepping back, meaning if you have already spoken, give a moment before you speak again to allow all voices. And if you haven't spoken yet, please jump in towards the second half when you feel comfortable. All questions are good questions, and please use the chat feature freely to go to off-topic subjects or your own thoughts that you'd like to share. And if there are questions there, we'll notice that. Laxman Belbase, who's with us today with the Global MenEngage Secretariat, is on chat and will help respond and bring questions forward from there. So that's terrific. I don't need to go over this too much. This is our agenda we've had the last times, and today is really reflections on lessons learned. What's resonated with the series? What are your takeaways? What are your questions? What are the next steps? What seems hard? What seems possible to do right away? How can we help? These are kind of the leading, guiding questions. And Russ Funk, who's with us today, is going to facilitate this conversation. He's waving. Hi, Russ. And I'm going to turn it over to Russ in a moment, and it's up to you in terms of how you want to do introductions today. There are 8 of us, maybe there's time. We'll do a roundtable discussion, and a reminder to unmute your line when you talk, otherwise we will have to wave at you or something to get it. So do we have anyone, I'm just noticing, just online on the telephone? Not so far, so we don't have to go into that. Over to you, Russ.
Good afternoon.
My slides, would you like me to turn the slides off?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll turn my slides off.
Hey, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. It's summertime here in Kentucky, and so we're enjoying our heat here. I wanted to take a quick moment and kind of, from my notes and my reflections, and I took an opportunity to go back over the 3 sessions that we've had so far in the last couple of days and kind of pull out some of the most resonating points for me. So as a way of getting started, I was planning on starting with that, and then as Craig said, open it up to you all around what are some of the challenges or successes that you've had, what are some of the lessons that you're learning about engaging men in these conversations. In our first session, I reported out on some of the work that I'm doing here in Louisville in response to the Me Too movement that started with a men's panel discussion and has grown into a much richer process of multiple conversations with men on the ground and women and trans folks around what is the role, identifying what the roles are of men in preventing various forms of sexual violence and sexual harassment. Laxman chimed in on a variety of things, and he raised some really good points around how men don't see this so much as a problem, and his reflections that the Me Too movement is not so much something new. This is something women have been saying for generations, and men have kind of positioned this as, I don't do it, so I'm not part of the problem. Why are you talking to me? But by that definition, that also positions them as not part of the solution. And so, how do we attend to that as we try and reach men and bring them in? Laxman also made some really good points around the tendency to individualize the problem. That, and as I understand that, what we mean by that is that it's that individual man who has an issue against that individual woman, and not so much looking at the systemic issues and therefore the systemic solutions. And then we had a really good kind of opened up conversation around what accountability means and how we practice accountability in our efforts. The second session, we had a couple of really fabulous presentations on the theory of change, looking first at the cognitive behavioral model and specifically information, motivation, behavioral skills model of cognitive behavior theory, looking at the social norms approach and how we empower men and engage men to address social norms. And then a model called the spectrum of readiness, which is looking at rather than trying to engage all men, focusing on those men who are most ready to be engaged and involving them directly. As well as a little bit of the strategies of how do we engage men in a way that moves them along those stages of readiness. And then last session, looking at immediate applications, we had a lot going on. Chuck from Minnesota talked about his work. My takeaway from that was that a lot of his specific models looked at, rather than engaging men in how to do one-on-one conversations, his approach is how do we engage men at the higher levels of the spectrum of prevention, particularly how do we engage men to do policy work, how do we engage men to do social norms change. We also heard from Alan again in Iowa and talking about the models, mentors and violence prevention model, and what he called a structural approach to statewide prevention. And then we heard from our friends in Stockholm about their works and really interesting to me, community-based conversations in Stockholm around what is this issue and how does it impact men. So I'm curious from you all, I'm going to slide over the chat for a minute. I'm interested from you all around what were some of the lessons that you all learned? What stuck out to you from our conversation so far? Did anybody learn any lessons from the last 3 webinars?
Hello, Russ.
Hello, Tom. Thanks for speaking up.
No worries. Hi, all. The name's Tom from Sydney in Australia. I think for me, what's been some of the richest conversation has certainly been from the NAMEN group in Sweden and looking at their format for their self-reflection groups. I'm really excited to hear that the translation is coming through in English. And just last night, I was speaking to 2 other men about their format for their 5-week series, and it just seems to be a really a really fantastic way to walk through the essential points of the conversation with men around reflection and around looking at listening and also hearing Me Too stories as well. And it just seems to be something to follow and something that's going to be really useful for me when we're looking to set up some groups here in Sydney that are getting off the ground really soon.
Awesome. Exciting stuff. Amanda, I see you posted in the chat about, pardon me, Amanda, if I can be so informal, we don't actually know. I don't know if I'm on a first name basis with you yet, a little presumptuous of me. You talked about starting a social marketing campaign geared towards men. Were you kind of just sharing that, or did you have some question around starting a social marketing campaign with your, I can't pronounce this, it must be a Native Alaskan Boys Run program?
Yeah, so I'm Amanda Capitamino, and I am with Stickins Against Family Violence in Sitka, Alaska. It's Boys Run Itu Ukletsin, and it's basically Itu Ukletsin means strengthen your spirit and cling it. And yeah, so we're having a lot of trouble finding male coaches, and we actually recently did a focus group, and men who have healthy relationships and, you know, there is no violence in their homes. They're like, well, we didn't think you needed us. Like, you know, we figured that you were good and that we were fine and that we were doing everything we needed to be doing. So we're trying to, instead of just being like, oh, come be a coach for this awesome program, and we do, you know, healthy relationships and how to express your emotions and uncomfortable ones, and like, it's okay to cry if you're a boy, and, you know, play with all the toys, not just the girl toys or the boy toys. And men don't seem to be interested in it. So what we're trying to work on is using stories, because those seem to obviously resonate really well with our community and in a lot of communities. So trying to use stories and from other men and boys about pressures of growing up, to try and create buy-in through resonating with their own experiences that they've had, and then using those to shift their thinking, and having it be like a social marketing campaign that's not, we're not just going to outright say Boys Run, do this program. It's just going to be like branded as like brought to you by Boys Run, and trying to take that approach to it. The only issue is I mean, how do you, I still don't know. I mean, how do you approach that? You know what I mean? How do you approach that in a way that they're going to accept that, or that you're not attacking them, or that something's wrong with who they are as a person or a man, or, and even in our focus group, they're like, I don't know, you know, they said, yeah, we're going to get defensive. And what do you do to help that? And they're like, get another man to say it, or like, so it's been really, we're very much, I don't know where to go from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about other responses, but since I don't see any other folks turning their mics off, I'm going to take a stab my own self, pardon the violent language, take a try my own self. I think that initial response you got from them as a focus groups of, you know, my job is to be a good man, and that's what I'm doing. I don't know what else I can do. I think it's a really common response. My experience, I should say, that's a very common response. And so gently nudging, or maybe not so gently nudging, around being a good man isn't good enough. We have a lot of good men, and we still have a lot of sexual harassment going on. And you know, I think what we found here locally is framing this as, if men harassing women is a norm, as identified by the Me Too movement, then men are part of contributing to that norm. And so what are we as men doing to contribute to the norm that allows other men to sexually harass? And what we found is that languaging, that messaging around what do I do to create a space that allows other men, allows me to not point the finger at me, to not really look in the mirror in that way, around what do I need to look at in terms of my own behavior? And, okay, I do have a part in this, if that makes sense. The other part for me, and this kind of responds back to Tom, your point around the interest of the Stockholm and that self-reflective conversations that they have going on. I don't know how to say this other than say this, is that I don't know. I think our defensiveness around this is part of the self-reflective process. You know, when I started this work, I did not start this work to be a better man. I started this work to save those poor little women because, you know, I'm so good and whatever I had going on in my 18-year-old brain. What I learned is that I have a lot of behaviors, have a lot of behaviors that are so problematic that I did not, as an 18-year-old man, I had no interest in looking at. And my frame is you can't engage men by trying to change men. And being engaged in this work is going to change us. And so understanding that even asking the question, what do I do to create an environment that allows other men to sexually harass? Inherent in that is some self-reflective question around, maybe there's some things I've done that have been maybe in a little gray area, maybe beyond a little gray area. And in Kentucky, that's very much a part of the response to the Me Too movement, is that there are a lot of men who are looking right now at what are some things that I've done. I've heard from a lot of women who've gotten calls out of the blue from men around, you know, I've just been looking at myself and I'm wondering, did I ever treat you in a way that made you feel yada, 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 yada? So I think that's part of the environment that we're in. I don't know that we need to necessarily protect men from that self-reflection. I think if we can figure out ways to lean into it around maybe we as men need to take a look at ways that we have done things that are really harmful. And maybe not to trigger their defensiveness, but so kind of normalize that experience of, yep, maybe you do need to take a look. With as prevalent, for me, with as prevalent as sexual harassment appears to be, it's unlikely we have as many good men as claim to be walking around the planet. There have got to be some good men who are doing some of this icky stuff. And I have to say, I'm listening to my language and I'm reflecting back on Laxman's point around that whole good man, bad man dichotomy. I'm hearing myself slide right into that. So Laxman, thank you for reminding us of that problem, of that problematic frame. Yeah, go ahead, Vidar, if I'm saying your name correctly.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Vidar from Men in Sweden. I don't know, maybe, yeah, I would like to just respond to what Amanda said and you I think in our groups, one really important thing is that the facilitator of the group is setting the tone by sharing something personal himself as a start, which is really to open up, to not just be the good man, sharing personal examples of both the pain in realizing that I have contributed to things and the will to self-reflect and learn more together with the others. And just by sharing something personal, you set the tone and it becomes possible for everyone else in the group to start sharing. And I don't know, maybe I didn't hear everything you said, Amanda, but did I hear you say that the men told you to find a man that could say this? Or did I misunderstand? So are you still struggling to find any men, or do you have some men there who could share something with other men to create that space?
Yeah, we do have men that are able to do that. We do have a support group, a small support group right now that I support. And I mean, I'm not there, obviously, but that I support and help. And we do have we do have those environments where men can be vulnerable, but
Russ, I think you are typing with the mic on.
Oh, sorry.
And
Say
so
again, please, the last thing.
oh yeah, so we do have space, well, that group is one space where men can be vulnerable and they can talk about these things, and they do, and accountability. But it's hard to get other men into that environment. I mean, especially just with Sika is a very like traditionally macho community. It's a lot of fishing and hunting, and a lot of the men are just, I don't know, I know I'm generalizing and whatnot, but they're very much that this issue is behind closed doors and they're fine. They haven't, you know, they don't hit a woman or they don't assault a woman, and so they're fine, they're good. And I think they just, I don't know if they want to hear it. I don't know if that's just that competition thing between men and they don't have those connections to be vulnerable and to say those things because they don't have those relationships. So I guess trying to even create those spaces has been really tough.
So I know from my own experience, and maybe that was what Russ also shared, that I came into this because I wanted to be this good man for the sake of the women. And maybe it's okay even to invite men to that space, to say like, how can you be a good father, or how can you come and talk about being a man that cares for your family, or using some language that is familiar to them and that they identify with and they think they are really good at this. And then when you come together there, you can deepen that conversation. So find a language that they relate to and feel they can identify with and want to be part of, and then you can share deeper there. Yeah, I think I repeated myself. I'm not sure it made sense. We do, for example, with fathers, we ask, come and talk about fatherhood, and then they come. And then it turns out we're talking about gender equality and how to be vulnerable and all that, because the need is really there when you feel safe. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Carlos here.
Welcome,
Hello.
Carlos. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the other session. Anytime it was happening, I was flying at the same time. It seems like I can escape from flying all the time. But listening the conversation, it's quite interesting how many times for myself I question myself around what does it mean being a good man, or what does it mean to be like a good person in general. And for me, it's not really a matter of being good or bad, but what's happened with me, it's like the question I asked many times to myself is how do I feel, or how was I feeling, growing up in a family where there was a lot of violence, and where do I stand, in the middle of that, and how can I understand and improve that, and not repeating the same pattern, like the way, my brothers especially, who also were quite against that when my dad was having that behavior against my mom, but they're now repeating the same pattern. So it's not really about being good, but it's about how can I fix, or how can I come over, all those things that hurt me when I was kids, and not repeating the same thing in my life. But the other interesting thing is that the pattern is being repeated in general in the communities in general, and in the LGBT community. It's quite strong, like among gay men. How if you don't define, clearly your position, your sexual position, you're being rejected by other folks in the community, and not being perceived or seen as a man. But then when it comes, to define what men means, really, they don't really know what the definition is. So the work that I'm doing, because I'm very involved in different groups, and I'm very involved with different activities, and around the world, it's to try to understand where men, at least people who define themselves as a man, and also the gender, where they position themselves around things that hurt them, especially when they were kids, and how they try to, repair that, if it's a kind of word that I can use. But it's happened, they don't know exactly how to go through that. So it's easy for them to repair the same pattern and not feeling that they're doing the same thing. And it's just about expressing a kind of anger toward a person who is doing something bad to them. So the definition of good men, it's not really clear in people's mind. Men are doing just what they think it's right for them to do in a society, in a very patriarchal society, and even in the gay community as well. So it's a bunch of questions, actually. I never came up with some clear answers, because I think that we will never finish to answer to those questions. But what matters for me is if we open our mind, if we open doors, and we engage ourselves in that journey, it's a big step in trying to understand what really hurt us, and why it has been a struggle for us, all our life, even as an adult. So yeah, it's something that and actually yesterday I ran into a teacher, and he was we were talking about that, and he was asking me, like, how can we really make this movement as a part of a school program, because we know that some organization, gave some training in school, but we should reach the point where it become a program in school, because a workshop, a training, few session, it's not enough. And with youth, we really need to set it up as a program and educate, superintendent, directors, and school boards, so they can understand that it's a matter that we all need to work on if we really want to address even issues like building safer school for LGBT kids, especially trans. We have to come back on how we educate boys in school around issues related to masculinities, and that will really help to better address the safer school that include trans women as well as trans boys. Yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. It was interesting how I've heard this conversation kind of evolve as we've been going. Amanda originally asked a conversation around a social marketing campaign, and the responses in the conversation has been around conversations and discussions with men. And I'd like to explore bouncing back. Ross, I'm going to come to you in a minute, so be prepared. But I'd like to explore back to her question around, because I think that's a broader question for a lot of us of we know how to facilitate these conversations. We know how to facilitate groups and classes, what have you, but a social marketing approach is a necessary approach to add to all of our agendas. And what does that look like, incorporating some of the lessons that we've learned around reaching men? Ross, the reason I wanted to come back to you is you made a point in the chat, which I really like, around how do you connect this message to what are those traditional masculine, the way those traditional masculine identities emerge in an environment. So Amanda, you were talking about how the traditional masculinity is very much the fishing and hunting, and there, I think Ross was suggesting there may be elements to that you can rely on to draw men in. Ross, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was getting at was kind of going back to this idea of meeting people where they're at. And I think that it's not uncommon that men know how to spend time with each other. I think we often do that. I think, and so why not kind of just enhance those times where we're already spending time with each other. As I was thinking about it a little bit more, and I was trying to add it to this chat as well, but whereas men do know how to spend time together, we often don't do it in a very healthy way. And so I think the training, if there is any for men, or not training, but the learning for men is, how do I spend time with other men together in a way that's healthy and for both of us, I guess. Because what I'm thinking about is, when we spend time with each other, I think one of the ways we try to bond with each other is through women. Does that make sense? Especially for heterosexual men. So I don't know how many times, if this has ever happened to anybody else, but I think I was at grabbing some beer one time, and a guy that I didn't even know came up to me and started complaining about his partner, right? And so trying to get to know me as another man while complaining about a woman is a weird way to spend time with each other. I think that's how we often think about spending time with other men. And so I think we would be careful about that. But at the same time, it's also getting to summer here in Massachusetts. So we've been heading up to New Hampshire and hiking quite a bit, and realizing the intimacy of that space, and recognizing that too, and how important that can be for meeting men, and yeah, for meeting men where they kind of already want to be.
As Ross shared that on the chat, one of the things that helped me remember was there's an organization in way northern Upper Peninsula, Michigan, that is a very Norwegian community, and traditionally, so there's a lot of men with beards, and what they started doing, this is several years ago, and it continued. What they started doing was having a healthy beard contest to lean into that. And part of the contest was not only men showing off their healthy beards, but also what is their understanding of healthy manhood and healthy masculinity and healthy relationships. What is men's role in a healthy relationship? So they tied this imagery around this cultural norm around beard growing and having a big, full, bold beard, to men's support of women and gender equality. And they've gotten some, back to the storytelling idea, through that process of having these men tell their own stories around how they, as a man who happens to have a beautiful beard, also supports women's gender equality, or women's gender respect, or whatever their particular lens on that was. And by having them tell their stories, they normalized it for other men in the community, but also deepened those men's level of engagement and involvement, because they heard themselves talk. What they found in this community, they heard themselves talk, and all of a sudden they had more reasons to more deeply involved. So it's a really interesting model, I think, kind of at what Ross is referring to around, here's this cultural norm that already exists. Let's be really creative and fun and playful around tying it to some of our goals. Anybody else have any thoughts or input at this point?
Hi, it's Jamal in Arizona. I think one of the things that Amanda said that really stood out to me, which is very common, along with kind of these traditional or stereotypical masculine roles, is the expectations, right? So the expectation is, if I don't hit a woman, or I don't treat a woman in a particular way, then I'm doing my part. And so to kind of reimagine and then deliver what the expectation is, because we're no longer having a traditional masculine role. What we're doing is we're creating this humanity between genders, right? And that's with women, with children, with those in the LGBTQ community, And so those expectations are now different. So it's not just about not hitting or not being overtly violent. It's about like, how do we now set the expectation that treat everyone with kind of respect, and then really operationalizing what respect is and looks like.
Excellent, thank you. Vidar, are you waving to say something else, or?
No, sorry, it's a way to say thank you.
Oh, okay.
Appreciation. Yeah.
All right. Greg? Craig has been having issues with his sound system, so he was starting to say something and we just couldn't hear it. So,
hi, Russ.
yes.
Yeah, so Craig has put in his comment in the chat box as well, and his comment is continue focus groups, keeping learning about the entry points. An interesting starting question could be what bothers you, and explore that further as an entry point to further discuss with men. And also, what did you like to learn more about, and then start it from there. That's one also, and then other, Alan has also put out a video as an interview of Jackson Cards, who uses sports as a methodology to engage with men and boys in groups. So that is also one way of starting. And few other strategies that we often see our friends using globally as well is using videos, short clips, for example, as an entry point to start discussing with men on the issues that are relevant to them. And Vidar mentioned about fatherhood as one entry point. But also one thing that I often has also used and found helpful is to start talking about their own socialization, who they are, getting to know themselves better. Sometimes, we men generally do not tend to look at ourselves much often in our own lives. Sometimes helping us to reflect our own lives actually helps us to realize that there is something wrong within us. And that has really helped to create a safe space among men themselves to start opening up and discussion, share, and see the problems and us ourselves being part of the larger problem. And there's this, what Ross, you were mentioning earlier, is then it's important for men to see us as not as individuals, as problems, but how we see us playing concrete some roles around the systems that are around us that are problematic. So sometimes it's helpful to start saying there is a problem out there, and then slowly try to bring them into to say how they are themselves are part of the problem, or we as men are ourselves as part of the problem. So starting from what Ross said, where they are, is one way of looking at helping them to really look at themselves as individuals. And otherwise, sometimes what we also sometimes use is to take an issue that is of a global concern or a national concern, or is a hot topic during that moment. And I sometimes used to use issues of small arm use by men, especially in gang violence groups. So I used to sort of take that as an opportunity to start what's happening, why is it wrong? Even then, a lot of people that I engaged with were not necessarily part of the gangs, but then using what's happening around the gang violence, the gang culture, as an entry point to slowly tie them in to see themselves being part of the problem. So that was a slow way of, it takes time. It didn't happen in one session. It at least takes 5-6 sessions to really make that connection. So probably you have to understand the group that you are working with, and to understand what might be an interesting way to bring them in. So that's some of the strategies that some of our friends do use, and I myself have used in the past as well.
Thank you, Laxman. As you were talking, one of the things that emerged for me was a realization or a remembering of how poorly we as men are about showing our failures to each other and our flaws, and the fact that I don't have it all figured out, and I'm not always the perfect guy, and that how that piece, especially if we're inviting men to step into this work and step up to being an ally or trying to be an ally, that if I haven't figured it all out and I don't know how to do it perfectly, then I don't know how to do it and I can't do anything. And how do we create space for, and I think it's by modeling, how to create space to do the oops and to make mistakes and to do things poorly, but keep trying and be accountable in the process. Which kind of triggers back to Tom made a point around in the chat around, as he says, not so much connecting in unhealthy ways, but greater intentionality about our connecting, which I think is a really good point. Craig had a question, if I can find it.
Yeah, okay.
Craig was saying, Carlos here, so he was saying that he's interested in knowing what experience do any of us as in responding to men about the fact that men are worrying about being caught in the Me Too movement.
I was just responding to that, so rather than writing it out, I guess I'm, Craig, I'm wondering if that means fear of being called out in some way, fear of having past transgressions coming to light. Is it about, also there's that same fear that so many men have had for a long time about false accusations, which we know are pretty small in number, but like what level are we talking about in that regard? Because I think that there's a part of that that's also around like keeping, I think there's a part of it that keeps a lot of men from wanting to engage in it, because why would you? Like, why would you want to take that risk, right? If I can be seen as a good guy because I'm one of those guys who's not being called out, I'm not being named, I'm not abusive to my partner, so why would I want to engage in this? Why would I want to take that risk? I mean, I think that's some of what I hear from people. And you know, some of my responses are things like, well, if you you know, one of the things I guess what I hear specifically is are things like, well, how am I supposed to flirt now? How am I supposed to be in the workplace now? And my response is, well, if it wasn't a problem before, it's probably not a problem anymore. And if it was, then it was a problem before. I just throwing that out there, I guess. I'm curious about just some other clarity on that.
Mm-hmm.
Carlos here. It's a very interesting question that Craig asked, because I recall last year when there was the big march, and it was in the big cities, specifically there was a march here in Toronto, and for the first time some men came out to join women and march with them. And the outcomes of that, I mean, the interesting experience was that men who join women to march, they have different reason to do that. But there was after that, I can't remember exactly which channel was doing that, but they were asking men, why did they join the movement and how did they feel having that conversation with other men, their friends or brothers or whatever, colleagues and something like that. So there was that guy who said that he joined the movement because himself grew up also in a very violent family, and seeing his mom being beaten up, and he couldn't understand why his dad was doing that all the time. He was certainly feeling hurt, but he never came to his mom to tell her like how much vulnerable he felt himself and how much he could show her how supportive he could be to her. And in fact, he never told her that he loves her. So when the movement started last year and the women were marching and men joined the movement and marching with them, he felt that was the only way for him to express whatever he never expressed to his mom when she was going through such violence. And there was another man who said that, well, he works in human rights, and for him, it's human right is human right. It's not. There is no difference between genders and stuff like that. And even though he has been working for many years in the in that field, he never walked beside women. So it was like for him a momentum that he was building by joining women to march together. But also he got some weird comment from his friend, other men, saying that, oh, are you looking for a space where you can have your own psychotherapy? Or, so he got hit by that comment because he said, well, now they're perceiving, because I'm marching with women, they're perceiving me as a weak man. But he has never been able to understand why they're making such a comment, but he got really seriously hit by that comment. So there was different reason why men would join, and also different reason why men could feel, worried by being caught by other men in, joining women to march in the for such movement. It's a very kind of interesting and weird dynamic at the same time. The comments that other men can make, seeing the folks men joining women, it seems like they're also trying to express their own vulnerability, but they're not going to use the right words to say it.
What also occurs to me is, there is a extremely loud and common narrative of how men are destroyed if they get accused of sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence. I'm remembering in particular the rhetoric that emerged from the White House when one of his aides or somebody lost his job because of allegations of domestic violence. And all this rhetoric about how his life was destroyed. And his life was not destroyed. I don't know if anyone's followed up, but I'm quite sure he's doing quite well right now, making a whole lot more money than he was under the White House. And I'm sure he's fine. But I think that narrative around how our manhood is so vulnerable around these accusations and there isn't a real model. There are very few models of men actually stepping up and being accountable and making amends. And what does that look like? To say, okay, yeah, I did that and I'm really sorry, and what do I need to do to fix it? Without that model, which I think some men have in their individual lives, but we don't have them on the global scale or on the national scale by any means, then I think that reinforces this fear that if I do step up, then I'm more likely to be called out because I am stepping up and I'm in a position to be called out. And that would be a horrible thing. I think part of our responsibility is to remind folks that, yeah, maybe it's not a horrible thing. Yeah, it would be embarrassing. Yes, it probably would be a little humiliating. And maybe it's not a horrible thing to be challenged on our behavior and held to account.
And I think to that point, Harvey brought up in his comment about privilege, and one of the things about having male privilege is not only the fact that we don't have to examine our own behaviors oftentimes, but it's also the fact that if we do utilize the privilege, we're policing other men on how they should behave. And so oftentimes the way that then translates is, if I am, and privilege is a very sensitive subject, and people will take that as, you're miscategorizing me. And so to understand that part of that is the privilege that we hold, and that if we then try to utilize that privilege to turn it on its head, that's going to get met with resistance. And we haven't necessarily come to terms on how to present that, how to work through those feelings of, I now feel attacked and defensive because you have, you've used one of the tools that I didn't have to examine.
Thank you. Good point.
Just a question, looking at Craig's original question as well. I guess I'm interested, and Jamal, you talk about Brene Brown's daring greatly and addressing shame when it comes to disclosures around past transgressions, around using our power, using our status as men. I guess I'm interested to know from the group as well whether or not, when men are coming forth and disclosing that they have been manipulative, that they have been harassing, whether or not in those disclosures there is valuable information and learnings around those acts, and whether or not the voices of these men can offer us stories that we should be using with other men. So talking about these occasions, wonderful ways, and whether or not these can be lessons for other men, or whether or not their voices are dangerous and should not be offered a platform.
That is a great question, Tom. Thank you. And I guess part of that for me is, if we do believe in the ability of people to make amends, if we do believe in an ability for people to learn from their mistakes and move forward, then what does that look like in terms of men who have behaved in these kinds of ways, learning from their experiences, stepping up and becoming, taking action. It is reflective also of me. A long time ago now, 15 or 20 years ago, I used to work with adolescents who perpetrated sexual offenses in Baltimore. And one of the things that we required in this program was, in order for them to complete the program, at some point they had to design and provide a rape prevention program to adolescent men, and that their presentation would be approved by the local rape crisis center. That we did not expect or ask them to come out as adolescent rapists or adolescent sex offenders, their language, but putting them in that position of talking with thinking about how are they going to talk with other young men around preventing sexual assault, was a part of what we understood was part of the process of their doing some amends, as well as a process of, I'm a firm believer that people learn best when they start to teach. And these young men were being taught and talked at. Sometimes they talked at each other, but it was also myself as the facilitator being grown, talking at them most of the time. And so sliding them into a different role was a great opportunity to check what they were learning. But I think it goes back to, Tom, your point around how do we include the voices of all men in this process? And I think that's an interesting conversation to point.
Yeah, Laxman here. I think that's a interesting question to reflect on, but sometimes what I do in those cases is it also depends on what type of violence are we talking about. And also to consider those violence, because when we talk about exposure or being open of the previous act, it also has to do also with how those acts are in relation to the local criminal system. If they fall under, from the legal perspective, under the criminal justice system, then we are bound to report such behaviors if they come under that as social workers. I think that's sort of an ethical standards we need to maintain. And also many a times also I consult with women's rights groups to check how they feel about utilizing those voices. I think as men, we generally tend to miss some points down the line for some reason when it comes to being sensitive enough on the disclosures and how we handle them. So for me, it's very important we do check in with the women's rights leaders or actors in our own organizations, in our own networks, depending on what kind of the sharing is about. And I think, yeah, we do need to do a bit of analysis based on this information.
Thanks, Laxman. I'm not exactly sure where we are with time. I believe we're at about time to move on to the second part of this conversation. But this is really getting rich, unfortunately. So I'm a little curious around how to, part of the agenda for today is also looking at this idea of continuing this conversation beyond these 4 series. And Tom and I have some recommendations around what we might do going forward. He and I are limited, constrained in terms of how much we're going to be able to facilitate going forward with this. But clearly, as this conversation is exposing more topics to go into more deeper and getting richer as we go, as our hour and a half continues, there's more to be shared. But I'm going to have to ask Craig, if are we at that point in the agenda, or do we have some more time to spend here?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, good. Dialed in as well, so I'm one of the phone numbers now. So anyway, hi everyone. Yeah, we should talk. Why don't you talk about what you two would like to offer at this point, some specifics, and let people, plans to join us if possible or indicate their interest. And then we can talk about a couple of logistics items about the about further activities, and then we can finish up this conversation. We have a full half hour at this point. So why don't y'all talk, since you started that conversation, what do the two of you have in mind at this point?
Tom, do you want to take it?
We talked about continuing to have some kind first of all, see who's interested, continuing the conversation, and also to think about what are, and some of this was coming up here, like what are some of the challenges that people are facing, and how we might be a working group, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, Russ, but be kind of like a working group and help to support people, maybe do some troubleshooting with people, so I'm thinking about, I'm trying to engage with this group of men, engage in my community in these ways, and here are some of the challenges I'm facing. Does anybody have some thoughts, some feedback, some things that have been successful for them? So that's part of what we were hoping to do as a next step. Think about what would be some ways that we can, and I think we have 2 sessions that we were thinking about planning out. It would basically just be discussion sessions. And if folks wanted to say, well, I would like to spend, so if we had 5 people, we would break those 2 sessions up, and so that some people would get some time, everybody would get some time specifically with thinking about their particular issues, their particular context, and spending time focused on what their issues are, what they're bringing to the table. That sound about right, Russ? I know you got interrupted there for a little bit, but.
Yes, that's not what I heard was was right on, and kind of creating I think Tom and I see ourselves as facilitators, not teachers in this model. So creating a space where we can share and talk, and we're all teachers and we're all learners together is kind of the model we had in mind. But as you all know, needing to have somebody's step up and kind of facilitate and have a starting point and have an ending point and organize the thing.
This is Craig. Do the two of you have a specific offering as a starting point? Time, day, place?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
A time and date for a first discussion? Want to suggest you have that ready?
We had
talked about
one for Tuesday. I'm looking at the dates. Hold on a second. Tuesday, the 26th of June at 1 o'clock Eastern time.
1 o'clock?
And July 3rd, also 1 o'clock Eastern time. And, we've talked about different ways of thinking about it, because this is one model of being able to have people sit and talk to each other. And so that's part of what those times would be. We also thought about whether or not it could be either or I'm sorry, that and or something involving more of a chat of sorts. It would really be more. So it doesn't have to be. We don't all, you know. So people may not be able to make it at 1 o'clock Eastern time on those 2 dates. So would that be the way to do it, or would it be better to have it be more of a online discussion, a written discussion, I should say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Well, both are possible. I would think you just get the ball rolling and decide to offer an online piece between the two would be probably a reasonable thing.
So I think for those of you who are on the call, what I know there's several of you responded to the survey. 3 of those responses were Tom, Magali, and Alan. But I'm for those of you in the room, does that sound of interest? Would you be available on the June 26th to take part in this? Would you like to have some kind of way to continue? Can we just have a show of hands or some indication that you're in, you're out? Okay.
One thumb.
A few folks.
2 thumbs.
Okay.
Thumbs up.
All right. So Tom and I will be back in touch about the parameters of the June 26th gathering. If you could email, I guess, I think it's helpful for you all to have some kind of topic leading into it, as opposed to coming in and just hearing this is what we're going to talk about. And there's plenty here that we have in the discussion. So.
Well, I just making sure I'm unmuted here. So I make sure, I just see, like, for example, that Ross just said he can't do June 26th at 1 p.m. But I'm also curious about interest in this, because I would hate for people to be excluded from it because of because we're trying to all do it at the same time. I guess that's part of what I'm thinking about. So I also see, thank you, Ross. So, and so I think that I wonder if there's not, I mean, I think we can try it on June 26th, but I also want to make sure that there's other mechanisms.
Yes.
So we, we'll also,
well, now I'm in here, NAMEN does have a discussion board, and we could put it to use here. Unless you'd rather just use email. Email is something we're all already using. So either way could work. I think leave it to the 2 of you. If you want to pose a couple of questions to get started with for that time, and just use that as a way to launch it. Does that work for the 2 of you?
It might. Again, I think for me, the way we had talked about it was really about trying to think about it, for lack of a better way of saying it, was troubleshooting for people. Right? Like we're all have challenges in this work. You know, it's just part and parcel of what it is. So how do we create a venue where there's collective wisdom to be able to get that out there and to get that wisdom to each other?
Sure. There's a question posted about the possibility of sharing content or transcript if they can't make it. There's a really great question about recording. I don't know if you'd want to record it, but it is recordable if we use this platform.
I think a lot of those are it's part of the questions, it's part of the figuring this out. One of the challenges that both Tom and I struggle with is how much time and energy we have to devote to this. Right. This is pro bono work for us, and we both have other pro bono work that we do both for NAMEN and in other ways. And so being really mindful of, we're willing to offer some support around this and getting this going, but we're not offering a blank check. And so just how much can we do to support this conversation in a way that is as engaging and open to all of you all, but doesn't become another job for either one of us at this point. So just trying to, you know, be really transparent with you all around where we're at, around what is it that we might be able to offer. Somebody.
I was gonna say it's a little hard to know how many people. I mean, how many people are interested versus how many people can make it, and just trying to figure out. I think part of that is assessing. So maybe it'd be great to have a numbers set to think about whether or not it is going to be sort of something that we do at 1 o'clock Eastern time, or whether it's something that we're going to do as part of that discussion.
Well, I'm seeing a number of folks, Amanda, Ross, a couple of other folks talk about the desire for an online, they're liking the idea of an online chat board, forum, discussion board, something like that. Does that have more resonance given all the constraints versus an opportunity where we come together and chit chat like this?
Yeah. So yeah, if I may come in, Lakshman here, at the MenEngage Global website, you can find a link. We have a blog on accountability and partnerships. So if you would like to, it's a blog spot or something. We host a lot of similar articles up there as well. So feel free to use, if that is a better platform and that works for all of you, to use that as well. We have that space too.
Thank you, Lakshman. I am not very tech savvy, so I'm not sure what's the difference between that platform and Craig. You mentioned that NAMEN has a discussion board. What would be the difference between those two options?
Well, a blog is like sending a message or an article, and then there's the comments to the blog. So the comment space in the blog is sufficient for this conversation. The blog can work. It's like a discussion board, the comment space. A discussion board really amounts to posing a comment, and the comment is answered or replied to by folks, and that's all stored. You can go back and read all the comments. It's like email, but in a confined space. And so the discussion boards mean, I'd be happy to invite everyone here to a discussion board on this topic, and we can all just see how it works. That could be a way to start this. And then Lakshman, are you thinking of posting an article, then asking folks to reply to it in comments? Is that your thought?
Yeah, sort of. Also, a means to what we were talking on the day one was, what we currently miss is sharing of learnings that are coming out of the work we are doing. And within MenEngage, one thing that we are trying to promote as much is what are the learnings those are emerging from the works we are doing. And also that can be a space to pose out questions, the challenges that we all are facing, and utilize that space where we can engage in a conversation, where we can help each other with ideas, with sharing of stories across the world, and in North America in this case. So that was what I was thinking in general.
Sure. But more articles as opposed to dialogue. Or are you also thinking about dialogue?
Article, and then follows that the dialogue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there are different kinds of platforms. And I guess I want to know whether, it's back to you, Tom and Russ, really, what you're comfortable with. I'll be able to support technically. So it's what you're comfortable with at this point. Unless you think there's something the group can weigh in on. I'm not quite sure.
Well, I think that, as Russ already said, both of us and all of us really have a lot of things in the fire. So we're not talking about an ongoing process.
No, it's 2 sessions. You're offering 2 dates, and then maybe an online piece, but that's it. Right.
The online piece that would happen over the course of a couple of weeks is my guess. Does that sound right to you, Russ?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm still fine. I'd be fine with all of that. Sounds like, the online piece is almost more of a moderator than a facilitator, but.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that time frame of that last week of June through kind of early middle July having both of these and the discussion board going on at the same time, to see, and seeing how that goes. I think that could be.
Yeah, and given the interest, we can segue into discussing NAMEN a little bit and our resources. And and all of you on the webinar, right, on the web conference right now can tell we haven't done this before. We're figuring this out as we go. And so in terms of, that's why we don't have like a firm, concrete offering here. So we want to let this emerge a little bit, but also if there's enough interest and it's sustainable, I think we will look for resources to find a way to facilitate this in an ongoing way. I think we would be interested in that. But let's let this unfold and see where we go. NAMEN membership is something like being able to register it on our website is necessary to use the forum. So everyone here who's interested should let me know, and I'm going to register you, because as being part of this webinar, you get a 1-year membership anyway in NAMEN, if you'd like to have it. And we'll register you, and then you can just use this forum as a starting place, and there's 2 meetings scheduled. And we'll do reminders, and we can use this platform here for those 2, a Zoom platform for those 2 sessions, and we'll learn from the experience. Does that sound like an acceptable frame?
Well, and Ross has the question about the possibility of this being recorded, and these often are. So if there's comfort with that, I think we could record the June 26th, maybe both, but for now agree to record the June 26th meeting, conversation, whatever it is,
sure.
And allow those of you like Ross who can't be there on the 26th to be able to come back, take a look at it, and then be involved in the discussion board and or the meeting on the 3rd, with whatever you resonates with you about the conversation.
Okay. Well, that sounds great.
All right.
So any questions from anyone about how this might work, so we can be clear? We'll put together a little email that explains the details and how to be part of it. I think that's terrific. Good. Any questions about NAMEN and the membership piece? Happy to answer any questions about that.
And since I'm not hearing any, feel free to invite your friends and colleagues to join NAMEN as well. I'm just saying.
Of course, it's always that. So Russ, back over to you in terms of closure and continuing the conversation on the table today. You've got just 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left. Goodness, there was so much thrown up on the chat there at the end that is worth going back into, but you know, we have 10 minutes left, so I'm not exactly sure where to go with this. I really appreciate you all's involvement through the series with us and with NAMEN, as Craig said, as we figured this out. I'm just going to look through the chat real quick and see if there's anything.
Will anyone have any question, something in your mind from our conversation? Let's jump in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I was just thinking that at a certain point, it would be great for us to be able to, in our respective, countries and cities and towns, if we were able to get men collectively, like in a room, and then still have these conversations, right? So this is a working group, but it actually be like if I could get 7, 8 the men who are also doing this work all in one room, and then Russ, you could get, so so it almost becomes like an impromptu, or not impromptu, but kind of a conference, right? And so hear more voices and things where we're all kind of coming to this space, this virtual space, in order to have these conversations, as opposed to each one of us individually like showing up. So kind of commit to bringing 7 or 8 people into our spaces, however that may work. I know that not everybody has that ability, but it'd be nice if we could at least work up to that and get some of those resources.
Mm-hmm.
God, thank you. I love, Jamal, I love that model. I love that image of, I don't know what it would look like. You know, I have a little bitty computer with a little bitty camera, and so I don't know how we would get, but other people are smarter around technology about that, and I think that would be, we do have universities in Louisville, so I'm sure one of them could host something like that. I just, thank you, that's
right.
Beautiful.
And it's not about your camera size, it's about just how many men you can fit in a particular space, right?
Yeah.
You can put the computer there, and then I have like 1, 2, 3, 4 other people in the space as well. So I think there are ways to do it where it doesn't, where we can kind of maximize the resources that we at least have.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me jump in real quick. I realized that someone else, Stephen, I can't tell whether you're on the phone or not, but if you wanted to jump in, I just want to mention that you were here, and if you invite you in, if you can. Go ahead, sorry. I think it's a great idea. Tom and Russ, would you be open to having something like that happen?
I heard that as a suggestion for down the road, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I think that what we're doing right now is we're really kind of piloting some things, but I think the idea of trying to have an online conference in some ways is what you're talking about. At least that's the way I see that would be really fascinating to do that, to have various different groups of men from various different groups of people from different parts of the world talking to each other about this would be great.
Yeah.
But that's a bigger process, I think, than what we're talking about over the next 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he seems to be indicating that with sign language.
Yes.
And the other piece for me that we've been wanting to really play with this model is how do we create different communities of practice? So we have a set limit around this process, but hopefully over the next 2 sessions, we'll figure out a way that you all can start communicating with each other offline, that you don't have to be through this venue to have a relationship with each other and continue to learn and grow and be a part of that. And so part of what I envision us using this model to create is how do we drop some seeds of communities, and we are now a mini community of 15 of us or so that can continue beyond whatever formal structure NAMEN provides for it. We really encourage you all to continue those relationships as you go around beyond this framework.
And if in 6 months or a year we're having a conference like that's being suggested, that would be awesome, because that would mean that we all would have had to do some legwork in our communities to, it could be just my computer and I'm sitting back and I'm moving like this, but it could also be that we're connecting with local community colleges because or whoever, or local community access TV or other places that have different kinds of technology to allow that to happen. So people can sit in a room and all be together. So, which then spreads the word of the work that's happening and requires us to do that kind of relationship building.
So one idea that I learned from youth Luxembourg from Africa is instead of asking people to write or type up something, they started creating videos with smartphones. And they started using this video as a means to discuss and dialogue. So they would put out videos in response to something somebody had said. And it becomes a discussion thread, so that, in this modern world where people read less and less, people do listen more and more. So that could be an innovative way of creating a dialogue as well. So people will respond to you in videos.
Thank you, Lex. That's an intriguing idea for me. Well, by my clock, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to bump it back to Craig as our host to wrap things up. And
Thanks, Russ. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone, for your time today. I'd like to ask if anyone has any closing comments or thoughts from the whole session today, or the section, or even the series. We have a minute or two. We don't have to close up just yet. I think I'll just pause here and see if anyone would like to share a thought about the process or about the content.
Hey, this is Alan. I'll just say I enjoyed listening to. Sorry, I was late getting to the group. This Craig, my session showed up on my calendar for 3 p.m. Central Time on my calendar. I don't know. I messed it up, but I'm thinking, with the whole Me Too piece and talking about the behavior that men are just displaying with the other men, and language, demeaning, harassing, abusive comments towards women, the whole Me Too thing. I'm, as an educator, I'm thinking, going back and thinking, how are we teaching? What are we doing in our health curriculums and in our existing family and social structures that are, basically whitewashing and just totally, removing young boys and men's accountability to themselves and to women and girls in their lives. And so I think great conversation moving forward is looking at some of those things in our respective societies and communities that are teaching and reinforcing these messages that it's okay to hurt and harm others, and to demean and degrade, and to be disrespectful and harassing towards men and to to women and to other men as well. So for me, that would be really interesting to talk about some of those aspects that are overtly teaching behaviors that lead to where we are today.
Thanks, Alan. That's good. Peter.
Yeah, hi. I joined the first meeting and I missed the 2 ones in the middle. I just want to express my appreciation for you creating this opportunity and this platform. It's really, really wonderful. And thank you for, I think we really don't need to have it perfect from start. It's great to pilot and prototype it together. And thank you everyone for it's been really nice for us to share what we are doing here, and to hear the response. And now the link was shared to where this our material will be in English soon. It has to be laid out first, and I did send our email addresses to you, Craig. Maybe you can post them as well, so you can send feedback and thoughts to us.
Sure.
When you read it or try.
We'll send out an announcement when it's all done. How's that?
Sorry?
Send out an announcement when it's all done. How's that?
Sorry, I can't hear you properly.
Oh, you can't hear me?
No, not really. What did you say?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
That's great. Good. That we'll send out an announcement with feedback details when it's all laid out.
Yeah, great. Yes, wonderful.
Thanks.
And I posted when we filled in this questionnaire about what we would like to talk about, one question for me and for us is also like, so how do we involve the women's organizations and more women in this work? So there is definitely a need for the safe spaces for men, but then also how can we think of working together with women in this? That's a